No one can defeat the Russians. This profound, almost prophetic statement was not uttered by a historian with the benefit of hindsight, nor by a defeated politician penning his memoirs. It was spoken by one of the most senior military leaders of the Third Reich, a man who had stood at the precipice of victory and stared into the abyss of total defeat. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus. His name is inextricably linked with one of the most pivotal and brutal battles in human history, Stalingrad. He was the commander of the formidable German Sixth Army, the elite force that was to be the spearhead of Hitler's ambitions in the East, only to be consumed by the unforgiving Russian winter and the indomitable will of the Soviet defenders. The life of Friedrich Paulus is a complex tapestry of duty, ambition, catastrophe, and controversy. To many, he is the architect of a monumental disaster, the man who led over 250,000 soldiers into a frozen hell from which few would return. To others, he was a victim of Adolf Hitler's megalomania, a loyal officer trapped in an impossible situation. And to some, particularly in the post-war era, he became a symbol of betrayal, a man allegedly brainwashed by his Soviet captors who turned against his former comrades and testified to the crimes of the Nazi regime at the Nuremberg trials. What is the true story of this enigmatic commander? Was he a brilliant strategist undone by fate, a spineless sycophant, or a man who underwent a profound transformation in the face of unimaginable suffering? To understand the man, we must journey back through the tumultuous history of the early 20th century, from the battlefields of the Great War to the inferno of Stalingrad, and into the shadowy world of a prisoner of war who would be called the Great Surrenderer. From humble beginnings to the heart of the Wehrmacht, Friedrich Wilhelm Ernst Paulus was born on September 23, 1890, in Hesse, Nassau, into a family of modest means. The son of a schoolteacher, he lacked the aristocratic lineage that was a common feature of the German officer corps. This sense of being an outsider may have fueled his ambition throughout his career. As a young man, Paulus aspired to join the prestigious Imperial German Navy, but was rejected. He then briefly studied law at the University of Marburg before finding his true calling in the military. In February 1910, Paulus enlisted in the 111th Infantry Regiment as an officer cadet when the First World War erupted in 1914. He was thrust into the crucible of the Western Front, participating in the initial German offensives in France. He served with distinction, primarily as a staff officer, a role that suited his meticulous, methodical, and detail-oriented nature. By the end of the war, he had attained the rank of captain. In the turbulent interwar years of the Weimar Republic, Paulus remained in the downsized Reichswehr, the 100,000-man army permitted by the Treaty of Versailles. It was during this period that he honed his skills as a staff officer, becoming an expert in the emerging field of mobile, motorized warfare. He was not a charismatic frontline leader in the mold of an Erwin Rommel, but rather a brilliant planner and organizer who excelled in the complex logistics and strategic maneuvering of modern warfare. With the rise of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler's subsequent rearmament of Germany, Paulus's career accelerated. His expertise in motorization was highly valued in the creation of the new Panzerwaffe, armored force. By 1935, he was a key figure in the organization of Germany's first 3 Panzer divisions. His ascent continued, and in May 1939, just before the outbreak of the Second World War, he was promoted to Major General and appointed Chief of Staff for the German 10th Army. During the successful invasion of Poland in September 1939, his unit was renamed the 6th Army. Paulus continued to serve as its chief of staff during the Lightning Campaign in the West, which saw the stunning defeat of France in the Low Countries in 1940. Following these victories, he was promoted to lieutenant general and brought into the inner circle of the German Army High Command.
In this prestigious role, Paulus became one of the principal architects of the most ambitious and ultimately catastrophic military operation in history, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. In January 1942, he was given the command he had helped to create, becoming the commander of the German Sixth Army, tasked with the momentous objective of capturing the city of Stalingrad.
The road to Stalingrad, a gamble for oil and glory. The German invasion of the Soviet Union, launched in June 1941, initially achieved breathtaking success. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg tactics overwhelmed the Red Army, and German forces surged deep into Soviet territory. But the vast distances, the harsh weather, and the sheer resilience of the Soviet people brought the German advance to a halt at the gates of Moscow in the winter of 1941. For the summer of 1942, Hitler devised a new offensive, codenamed Case Blue. The objective was to seize the rich oil fields of the Caucasus, which were vital to the German war machine. The Sixth Army, under the command of the newly promoted General Friedrich Paulus, was a key component of this plan. Its mission was to advance eastward, secure the German flank along the Don River, and capture the strategically important industrial city on the Volga River, Stalingrad. Paulus, at the head of one of the largest and best-equipped armies in the Wehrmacht, executed the initial stages of the campaign with textbook efficiency. The Sixth Army, alongside the Fourth Panzer Army, swept across the steppes, brushing aside Soviet resistance and reaching the outskirts of Stalingrad by late August. Hitler, obsessed with the symbolic value of capturing the city that bore his nemesis's name, ordered Paulus to take it at all costs. However, the German offensive was already dangerously overstretched. The northern flank of the Sixth Army's advance was a vast, 560-kilometer front along the Don River, a line far too long to be held securely. To plug this gap, Hitler deployed Allied armies from Italy, Hungary, and Romania. These formations were notoriously under-equipped, and their morale was questionable, creating a critical vulnerability in the German position. Despite these reinforcements, the Axis forces were spread perilously thin. The entire Stalingrad campaign was an audacious, all-or-nothing gamble. Should it fail, Hitler's dream of world domination would be shattered, frozen in the unforgiving Russian winter, just as Napoleon's Grand Army had been over a century before.
The Inferno on the Volga. As the Sixth Army pushed into the rubble-strewn streets of Stalingrad, the nature of the war transformed. The open plains that had favored the German blitzkrieg gave way to a brutal, close-quarters urban war of attrition, a Rattenkrieg, or Rat War. The Red Army, under the command of General Vasily Chukov, adopted a strategy of hugging the enemy, fighting so close to the German lines that the Luftwaffe's air superiority was nullified. The fighting was savage and relentless. Every building, every factory, every cellar became a fortress. The German soldiers, masters of mobile warfare, found themselves embroiled in a nightmarish struggle for inches of ground. The battle for the Red October Steel Factory, the Dzerzhinsky Tractor Factory, and the massive grain elevator became epic struggles of endurance and brutality. Despite the ferocious resistance, the Germans slowly, bloodily gained ground. By mid-November, they controlled over 90% of the city. But the cost was staggering. The elite divisions of the Sixth Army were being bled white in the ruins. And as the first snows of winter began to fall, a sense of impending doom settled over the exhausted German troops. It was in this desperate moment that Paulus made a fateful promise to Hitler. He confidently declared that he would capture the entirety of Stalingrad by the end of October or early November at the latest. This assurance bolstered Hitler's fanatical determination to take the city, and he poured more and more resources into the meat grinder. But the deadline came and went, and the last pockets of Soviet resistance held firm. Operation Uranus, the noose tightens. While the Sixth Army was being consumed in the furnace of Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command, under the leadership of Marshal Georgy Zhukov, was preparing a massive counteroffensive. Codenamed Operation Uranus, the plan was a classic pincer movement, designed to strike the weak Romanian and Hungarian armies on the flanks of the Sixth Army, encircle Paulus's forces, and trap them in the city. On November 19, 1942, the storm broke. The Soviet Southwestern Front crashed through the Romanian lines northwest of Stalingrad, liberating a vast swath of territory. Simultaneously, the Don Front attacked from the south, shattering the German 4th Panzer Army's flank. The Soviet objective was clear: to sever the Sixth Army's lines of communication and supply and snap shut the jaws of the trap. The speed and ferocity of the Soviet assault caught the Germans completely by surprise. Within 4 days, the two Soviet pincers met at the town of Kalach, west of Stalingrad. The encirclement was complete. The entire Sixth Army, along with elements of the 4th Panzer Army and 2 Romanian divisions, some 300,000 men, were trapped. During this critical phase, Paulus's leadership was marked by indecision and an almost paralytic obedience to Hitler. Many of his subordinate generals urged him to defy Hitler's orders and attempt an immediate breakout while it was still possible. But Paulus, a man conditioned by a lifetime of military discipline, could not bring himself to disobey a direct order from his Führer. Hitler's repeated, fanatical stand-fast orders sealed the Sixth Army's fate. He feared that a withdrawal from Stalingrad would free up Soviet forces to threaten the Caucasus oil fields, and so he made the catastrophic decision that the Sixth Army must hold its position to the last man and the last bullet.
The Kessel, a frozen hell. Trapped in the Kessel, the Sixth Army's situation quickly became desperate. The brutal Russian winter descended with full force, with temperatures plummeting to -30°C and below. The soldiers lacked adequate winter clothing, food, and medical supplies. Starvation, frostbite, and disease became rampant. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, boasted that his air force could supply the trapped army from the air. It was a vain and empty promise. The Luftwaffe lacked the transport aircraft and the operational capability to deliver the 750 tons of supplies per day that Paulus requested. On average, they managed less than a third of that amount, and often as little as a tenth. To make matters worse, relentless Soviet anti-aircraft fire and fighter patrols took a heavy toll on the transport planes. Many of the precious supplies that were dropped fell into Soviet-held territory. The Kessel became a frozen landscape of death and suffering. The wounded froze to death in makeshift hospitals. The starving resorted to eating their horses, and the dead were left unburied in the snow. The memories of the German veterans who survived would forever be haunted by the blood, tears, and screams of that living hell. In mid-December, Hitler dispatched one of his most brilliant commanders, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, to lead a relief attempt codenamed Operation Winter Storm. Manstein's armored columns battled through the snow and fierce Soviet resistance, at one point coming to within 48 kilometers of the Kessel. He urged Paulus to launch a breakout attempt to link up with his forces. But the Sixth Army was too weak, too short on fuel, and Paulus, still shackled by Hitler's orders, refused to act without explicit permission. The relief attempt failed, and the last glimmer of hope for the trapped army was extinguished. The Great Surrender. By the end of 1942, the German High Command knew that the Sixth Army was doomed. Hitler's only response was to bombard them with heroic sacrifice, urging them to fight for greater Germany with resilience, tenacity, and courage. On January 8, 1943, the Soviets offered Paulus terms of surrender. They promised food, medical treatment for the wounded, and that all prisoners would be allowed to keep their personal belongings. Paulus had 24 hours to respond. He dutifully relayed the offer to Hitler and requested permission to surrender to save his men. Hitler's response was swift and unequivocal: Surrender was forbidden. On January 10th, the 24-hour deadline expired, and the Soviets launched their final offensive, Operation Ring, to annihilate the Kessel. A massive artillery barrage from over 5,000 guns pulverized the German positions. The fighting raged for weeks as the starving, frost-bitten remnants of the Sixth Army were squeezed into an ever-shrinking pocket. By late January, they had lost their last airfield, ending any hope of resupply or evacuation of the wounded. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazis' rise to power, Paulus sent a desperate radio message to Hitler. The final collapse is inevitable. In a bizarre and cynical gesture, Hitler responded not with orders for a breakout or surrender, but with a shower of promotions. Paulus himself was promoted to the rank of Field Marshal. The message was clear. No German Field Marshal in history had ever surrendered. Hitler expected Paulus to commit suicide. But Friedrich Paulus chose life. On January 31st, 1943, with Soviet troops closing in on his headquarters in the basement of the Wehrmacht department store, he surrendered. In the days that followed, the remaining 91,000 German soldiers, including 24 generals, also laid down their arms. Starving, frostbitten, and clad in rags, they began the long, agonizing march into captivity in the Siberian prisoner of war camps. Hitler was apoplectic when he heard the news. In a furious tirade at his headquarters, he railed against Paulus, screaming that he should have shot himself with his last bullet. That man, Hitler raged, should have taken his own life just as the commanders of old threw themselves on their swords when they saw that their cause was lost. The surrender of Paulus and the Sixth Army at Stalingrad was more than just a military defeat. It was a devastating blow to the myth of Wehrmacht invincibility and a turning point in the Second World War.
The prisoner and the propagandist. For the Soviet Union, the capture of a German field marshal was a propaganda coup of immense significance. It symbolized not only the military collapse of the German army, but also a deep crack in its morale. Almost immediately, the Soviets began to cultivate Paulus for their own purposes. They revived an anti-fascist organization, the League of German Officers, which they had been secretly fostering, and placed Paulus at its head. It was a relationship of mutual convenience. Paulus wanted to ensure the survival of his men, and the Soviets needed a prominent German figure to lend credibility to their anti-Nazi propaganda. From a prisoner of war, Paulus was transformed into a spokesman. The Soviets hailed him as the great surrenderer. In a move that shocked and appalled his former comrades, Hitler offered to exchange Paulus for Stalin's own son, Yakov Djugashvili, who was a German prisoner. Stalin famously retorted, "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." In August 1944, Paulus's voice was broadcast across the front lines from a Moscow radio station, urging German soldiers to turn against Hitler and end the senseless war. After the final collapse of the Third Reich, he became a key witness for the prosecution at the Nuremberg trials, providing damning testimony about Germany's war of aggression and the crimes committed by the Nazi regime. This collaboration with his captors has led to enduring accusations that Paulus was brainwashed or opportunistically switched sides to save his own skin. The truth is likely more complex. Witnessing the utter destruction of his army, the callous disregard for human life exhibited by Hitler, and the immense suffering he saw in captivity undoubtedly had a profound effect on him. He may have come to believe that his ultimate duty was no longer to a criminal regime, but to the German people and to a future free of Nazism. Final years and a controversial legacy. In 1953, after a decade in captivity, Friedrich Paulus was released. He did not return to West Germany, but instead settled in the communist German Democratic Republic, East Germany. 2 years later, the last of the Stalingrad survivors were repatriated. Of the 91,000 who had surrendered, only around 6,000 made it home. Paulus spent his final years working as a police inspector in Dresden and giving lectures on military history. He died on February 1, 1957, from a neurological illness, forever ending the story of the general who became the Great Surrenderer. The legacy of Friedrich Paulus remains a subject of intense debate. Was he a tragic figure, a capable but ultimately weak-willed officer who was overwhelmed by circumstances and a fanatical leader? Or was he a war criminal who found a convenient path to redemption through collaboration? He was a man of contradictions, a meticulous planner who presided over a logistical nightmare, a loyal officer who ultimately defied his Führer by choosing to live, and a symbol of Nazi aggression who became a voice against fascism. His story is a powerful reminder of the complex moral choices faced by individuals in times of war, and of the devastating human cost of blind obedience and fanatical ideology. In the end, perhaps the most fitting epitaph for Friedrich Paulus lies in the frozen, blood-soaked earth of Stalingrad, a city that became the graveyard of his army and the crucible of his own personal transformation.